Welcome. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for this webinar in the Pathways to Prevention series. This series is a partnership between the Injury and Violence Prevention Center and the Kemp Center for the Prevention and Treatment of Child Abuse and Neglect. I'm Sarah Brandspiegel. I'm an instructor at the Colorado School of Public Health and Director of Outreach with our Injury Center. And before we get started, I want to just do some introduction and then I'll introduce today's speaker. So first, I want to share that both of our sponsoring organizations for this webinar series are based at the University of Colorado Anschutz Medical Campus in Aurora, Colorado. And as we gather, we honor and acknowledge that the University of Colorado's 4 campuses are on the traditional territories and ancestral homelands of the Cheyenne, Arapaho, Ute, Apache, Comanche, Kiowa, Lakota, Pueblo, and Shoshone nations. We acknowledge the 48 contemporary tribal nations historically tied to the lands that comprise what's now called Colorado. This Pathways to Prevention webinar series is designed to connect prevention workers with the latest science on protecting children and ensuring well-being of families. We offer these free monthly webinars designed for those working in public health organizations, social services, child welfare, the nonprofit sector, and other related fields. And so during these sessions, you'll hear from researchers working on a variety of topics in the primary prevention of child abuse and neglect, as well as adverse childhood experiences. We always hold them on the 3rd Wednesday of the month at 11 Mountain Time. And we do record and archive these webinars on our website. So if you miss a session, you can watch the recording at a time that's convenient for you. Our next webinar in November will be on November 17th. And it is titled Substance Use Among Pregnant and Parenting People, Research and Interventions to Promote Wellbeing. And it will be presented by Anna Austin of the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. So I encourage you to register for that. My colleague has put the link in the chat for you to register if you're interested in that topic. And you can also look at our website and see the others that are scheduled through next February on different topics. I also want to quickly let you know that at the end of today's webinar, you'll be directed to a brief feedback survey, and please take a few moments and share your feedback on the webinar and your ideas for future sessions. So before we jump into the presentation, I do want to see who's joining us today. So I'm going to do a quick poll. And so these should be popping up for you on the screen to let us know where are you joining us from, different regions of the US, or maybe you're outside the US, and you can share more detail in the chat. And also let us know what sector do you work in primarily. We put some in here that we frequently have folks from public health, nonprofits, human services, education. And so I see folks are putting in their poll answers. I'll just give you a moment to complete that and then we can look at the results. All right. Looks like most of our participants now have responded to the poll. So let's share the results. Okay, so we've got 60% of our participants are joining from the Western US and 24% from the Midwest, and then fewer from the Southeast and Northeast and outside the US. And then in terms of the sector that people are working in, it looks like pretty split between human services, public health, and folks in nonprofits. And I see some folks putting into the chat some more information about where they're joining from. So that's great. And I encourage you throughout the presentation to share your questions and your thoughts in the chat, or the Q&A box is the best place to put your questions for our presenter today. So now I would like to introduce today's speaker. We are so honored to have Dr. Jessica Saniguq Ullrich, who's an assistant professor at the University of Alaska Anchorage School of Social Work. She's a tribal member of the Nome Eskimo community and a descendant of the native village of Wales. She holds a master's in social work and a PhD in social welfare from the University of Washington. And so glad you could join us today, Dr. Ullrich, to share your work developing a conceptual framework that makes visible Indigenous child well-being. I'm going to turn the floor over to you. And again, for everyone listening today, as Dr. Ullrich presents, please feel free to add those questions in the Q&A, and then we'll have time at the end to get to those questions. All right, welcome, Dr. Ullrich. I'll turn it over to you.
Upalalota, Koyana, for the beautiful introduction. Uwanga Saniguq Inupiaq, and I am on the Dena'ina lands in Anchorage, Alaska. And I'm so grateful for this opportunity to share what I've been learning about connectedness. And I really feel that this concept, this way of being, this way of relating is going to be key to systems change, to helping communities and families heal from generational trauma. There are so many elements to this that I feel apply to everyone, including our personal life. And that's part of what my journey has been. So I'm excited to share with all of you what I've been learning about connectedness. And this concept of child well-being is not just about individuals. I'm learning that child well-being is about collective well-being as well. So I'm going to integrate all of this into today's presentation. And to share a little bit more about who I am and where I come from, I'm, as was stated, a descendant of Kingigan in our language. That's the traditional name of the native village of Wales prior to colonization. It's not chance that my happy place is the mountains and ocean, because in Kingigan, when I first visited there for a dance festival, that's the landscape all around this community, and I felt this ancestral connection there. I also have roots in Europe on my father's side, in terms of Switzerland, Germany, and France. I'm the mother of two beautiful middle school daughters. I am a previous Office of Children's Services worker, which is the Alaska Child Welfare Child Protection System here. I was a supervisor, a trainer, a frontline worker. I had various roles within that position. I have a deep compassion and empathy for people who are doing their best to serve families. And I understand how challenging that really is within the child welfare system. I am now stepping into my new role, which I feel involves being a storyteller and an author and a researcher and an educator. And I love where this path is taking me. I love where I'm at in life. And I acknowledge my past, and I acknowledge that I grew up poor. I experienced childhood trauma myself. And that has shaped some of the things and informed some of the things that I've experienced and in what brought me to this day and brought me to this field, brought me to where I'm at now. And I feel that that empathy and compassion has been a doorway to connecting and to learning. And now I'm sharing what I'm learning, and it's been a beautiful reciprocal experience. I am a lifelong learner. I'm dedicated to that. I know that from throughout the rest of my life, I'll always be learning. I'm ever evolving. I'm not the same person today that I was 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 30 years ago. I'm always learning. So I acknowledge that I have much more to learn, and I'm excited to learn from all of you if we cross paths again. And where I'm at in this point in my life, I'm a healer of my heart. And this has created amazing, beautiful shifts in my life. And I feel it's prepared me to really engage in this work in a beautiful way that I hope connects with all of your hearts and will touch a piece within you that will help us all as a collective in this process of coming back in right relationship. I've had many teachers along the way, and I first acknowledge Nuna, the earth, Imik, the water, Siknik, the light, the sun. and sila, our air, our atmosphere, and the spirit within all of these. I would not be here today without this beautiful earth that we live upon, providing us with the food, the sustenance, the warmth, and the nourishment that we need to live and learn. And I also have learned so much from my panit, which translates to daughters. I've learned from Uig, my husband, and Angayogakit, my relatives. I've learned so much from my coworkers, other tribal child welfare leaders out there, from Indigenous scholars, elders facing foster care in Alaska, Alaska Center for Resource Families, who partnered with me on my dissertation research, from the Indigenous Wellness Research Institute, Minority Fellowship Program, Native Child Research Exchange. These scholars and connections have been, I wouldn't have made it. I wouldn't have crossed the finish line without everyone's support. And I'm so grateful for the courageous knowledge bearers who shared their story with me and allowed me to finish my research and my PhD. I wouldn't have been able to cross the line without them either. So I am so grateful. And I do this work, and this is a picture of my daughters when they were younger. But it's so important to always come back to, why do we do the work that we do? What is our intention? And the reason why I do this work is to help children keep the light in their eyes, to help them grow up healthy and well, to know that they have a beautiful, bright spirit that is wise, that is gifted, that comes into this world with an openness and curiosity and with so much love and light. And that's what I want to help our children maintain throughout their life. And I'm also motivated by different things in terms of what's been happening in our communities, our Indigenous communities, especially in regards to the Indian Child Welfare Act, and wanting to provide literature and research and help with efforts to inform different policies, child welfare policies, that help support the promotion of Indigenous child well-being. And I feel that this is a policy that does that. And so that's part of what I'm answering and asking in my research is, what is it within this policy that also is embedded in well-being and the relational aspects of it? And I actually wrote a Brookings Institute article on it not very long ago, trying to help kind of bridge what I'm learning about connectedness in this policy, and how I feel that child welfare, if we sort of implement relationality throughout the services and system, and have that as a foundation, that things would look much different than what they currently do now. And I'll get to explaining a little bit more about that as I continue my presentation. But it's always been one of my passions as well to end the disproportionate number of Alaska Native children in out-of-home care in Alaska. When I was finishing up my undergraduate degree, I was seeing articles come out in the newspaper that acknowledged this disproportionality, and I was just getting my foot in the door within child welfare. I was supervising visits at the time in Washington, and I decided, after seeing those articles and experiencing that position as a visitation supervisor, that I wanted to get into this field. I wanted to do work within this area because I wanted to help be a part of that change, to improve outcomes, to shift these numbers, and to end the trauma, essentially, of child removal. So to me, it's about breaking cycles of removal. And I am so appreciative of the mentors I had at University of Washington. When I first started my PhD program, I thought, okay, I'm going to have to focus on historical trauma and more trauma. And Tessa Evans Campbell and Karina Walters helped me shift to studying the well-being, because part of what our communities, our Indigenous communities have been saying is we know enough about the trauma, we're still living it, we're experiencing it. We need to know how to transform, transcend, shift this trauma, and come back to our concepts of well-being. And so that's when I made the shift in my studies and my research, and it's made all the difference. And going into my dissertation research, I did a literature review on Indigenous well-being, child well-being, and I had some hypotheses about what that could look like going into the literature. I thought, okay, maybe something similar to the social ecological model will show up in the literature. And also this a cross with Terry Cross's relational worldview model. And I was like, I'm probably going to see something along these lines. So I did a large literature review. This is just a little snapshot of how I took notes, and I approached the literature as data, and I was looking for what are the main concepts? What are those mechanisms of Indigenous well-being? And then I also got a lot of feedback in terms of different presentations I gave on some of the initial models that I was putting together, explaining connectedness essentially. And I'm just so grateful for all the connections I had that guided me to the framework that I'm going to present to you today. Just real quick, there's several well-being models out there, Indigenous well-being models. And this is what I also looked at closely to help me figure out a way to visualize, conceptualize, and portray what Indigenous well-being is from another perspective. And I just loved the elements were not just focused on individual, that Indigenous well-being included elements of family, community, the earth. And that's part of what I think is so important to recognize and to think of how do we have that be what drives our policies and practices. And, you know, in what ways are our policies and practices limited because it is too individual focused or only focused on parent-child dyads. So I just put that question out there for us to ponder. But this was the initial draft of the framework. I use this symbol. I was at the time I was writing my paper on this whole literature review. I was in the Seward Public Library. It's a community here in Alaska during the summer. And I looked for, you know, Alaska Native art. And I was like, maybe there's something within that artwork that I can sort of figure out a way to apply to explaining and creating a visual. And this symbol was in several of the pieces of sacred art from the Inupiaq region, from my region, also the Yupik region, which is in Western Alaska. And I thought, okay, I feel like I can use this in some way. And so that's how the symbol came to be. But this framework is portraying that children need relationships with the environment, with the land, water, animals, with community, all of the communities we belong to, whether it's a place like an actual environmental location or a social community, whether it's a school or a group of people that maybe they belong with, their peers or LGBTQ, you know, just giving examples of different social communities. The intergenerational aspect that we have connection to our ancestors and future generations, and that we're part of this kind of a history that is continuous, and we have future generations depending on us today. And so understanding our place in that and having a relationship with that is so important. I kept seeing that in the literature, as well as family, beyond blood relatives, beyond the way that family is often defined in different policies. It's family who we make to be our family. And with all of this is the backdrop to all of this is God, creator, the universe, spirit, however you want to conceptualize that that's what makes everything else possible. And we build these relationships through these different activities. There's action that happens in order to build and maintain a healthy relationship. And when children have these relationships, it helps them feel connected with who they are as a person. And it helps them have a sense of an identity that is both unique and connected to everyone and everything. So that was my literature review, but then I decided I want to just talk to people and I want to learn about how this framework could apply to the child welfare system and what else am I missing or what else could be added or what needs to be, taken out. What I approached the research in that way with wanting to learn more about this framework. And I briefly will just, put up here that Alaska has a very unique Indigenous context from the lower 48 or Hawaii or other places around the world. It's very large and diverse. There are several tribes here. There are corporations that also kind of change some of the political elements of our tribes. And it's very diverse. So we have different ethnic groups, different languages. So when I explain to you the Alaska Native context, understand that there's a beautiful diversity within that context. There's a beautiful diversity within Indigenous peoples. And this framework I'm portraying is like the bigger picture view, but I feel like it has to be community specific and made community specific and filled in with the knowledge and stories and wisdom of that community in order for it to be even stronger, better, and it could look different too. But those frameworks are important for us to be thinking about and building upon and applying to our work to help really shift systems and ways of doing the work, I believe. So in terms of the research, these were some of my methods and research aims. I'm going to move through the methods part a little bit quick. I'm happy to come back to anything if you have questions, because I really want to get at the results, what I learned from the knowledge bearers. But these were the aims and methods. These were the people I spoke with. I spoke with 25 knowledge bearers. I recruited people that identified as Alaska Native foster care alumni, relative caregivers, and foster parents. And this picture is showing you where various people who participated in this research were from. And I use the term knowledge bearer instead of participant because I feel that the term knowledge bearer helps level more of the power dynamics between the people sharing the knowledge and the researcher. I learned from them and I'm sharing what was learned from them. This is not my knowledge alone. I, of course, am interweaving some of my life experience and my lens of how I looked at the data and everything, but I give credit of this work to the knowledge bearers. So in terms of the results, I had different cycles of analyses I went through. I felt like I got really close to the data. I was coding things and looking for common concepts. And then I also kept stepping back, looking at the bigger picture lessons to be learned. And I had hypothesis codes going into it based on that first draft of the Indigenous Connectedness framework. I built upon the codes based on the stories that were shared. I I then merged codes and then came up with these as some of those important elements that I felt I needed to change within the Indigenous connectedness framework. And so I created an updated framework based on these codes. I felt like the descriptive coding process and kind of quantifying how many times I applied different codes gave me insight on what I needed to pay attention to in terms of those lessons learned, the bigger story narrative to come out of this research. And as we see here, the majority of the time people shared with me elements of those actions, the ways that well-being is promoted. And followed by that was this aspect of trauma as a challenge. I did not ask questions about trauma, but it came up frequently as people shared their story about what they believed child well-being was. And this was an kind of unexpected result that I also felt I needed to include in the updated framework. So in terms of the application of Indigenous storying, story work, storytelling, these were some of those bigger lessons that I felt needed to be heard and learned in terms of, number one, we need to acknowledge children's trauma, disconnect, and relational wounding. Number two, we need to maintain relational continuity and connectedness for child well-being within the child welfare system. And number three is that when that connectedness happens and there's relational healing that takes place, it helps the child know who they are, where they come from. It helps their inner connectedness as well as external connectedness. And that's something that I felt I needed to better explain in the updated Indigenous connectedness framework as a result. But let me share some quotes with you. So for this first lesson, these were just some of the key points that came up in some of those stories. So this is Sarge, a foster care alumni, that really talked about how important it was that, you know, this is not a hush-hush situation. We really need communities and families and people, our people, to be aware of what's happening with our little ones. I don't know if everyone really knows how disproportionate the number of Alaska Native children in out-of-home care is. I don't know if people have the knowledge of what's happening to our young ones through the child welfare system. So this is a message saying it's time to break that silence and to ensure that everyone has that awareness, and that, you know, these traumas are living things because it's within us, a living being. And there's no use anymore in suppressing them, silencing it. It's time for us to acknowledge it and talk about it. And I see parallels of that with what's happening with regards to the residential boarding schools and finding the mass graves on some of those lands. This is the time, I feel like the message is this is the time to do that healing, to make those shifts, to bring this up and out so we can really engage in that healing process. And that is parallel with what I was hearing from the knowledge bearers. And this was a foster care alumni who shared that as she went through the system, she never really got to know her culture. She didn't know she was a tribal member. She didn't have a certificate of Indian blood. She didn't know she was a shareholder of an Alaska Native Regional Corporation. And she had a young child that now she was going, where do I get this information? Because I don't want my child to not know this. So that to me is an indicator of something within the system that has to change so that we don't have anyone going through that doesn't have that knowledge or connection with that information. And then the system itself compounds trauma oftentimes. So this was a foster care alumni sharing how everything else was, you know, that this person went through with child maltreatment and trauma was not as bad as being separated from her siblings. And that's something I heard from pretty much all of the alumni, that was the most traumatic thing for them, was to be separated from their siblings. And how often that happens within child welfare, it's got to shift and change. We need a system that does not add to a traumatic situation, and removal from siblings and family and community is one of those things that is problematic about child welfare. And then I also heard from a foster parent how they felt that OCS ripped the children out of their care, and for good reason in terms of reunification with the parent. But it taught me to have empathy for the relatives and foster parents this person took care of the children for over 2 years and then didn't have any contact with the children after that. And I feel that message was telling me that we really need to help promote and maintain relational continuity, change the way that we see our roles in terms of providing love and care for children, and that birth families and foster parents should work together to build relationships, to be on the same page, in the way that when someone gets married, you have all of these in-laws now. And to really think about how we can be in relationship with each other for the benefit of the children, and for the children to know that people that love and care about them don't just disappear from their life. So this element of relational continuity, it applies to so many aspects of connectedness, like to family. So this is a quote that I felt supported that, when children were placed with this relative, they were also placed within a community and a family, and it helped that the children know that they belong. And this quote from another foster parent said, it takes a village to raise a child, it's being connected to that community. And he was really getting at how, I live in Anchorage, I have children that are in my neighborhood that I don't know yet. I just moved here to this neighborhood not very long ago. But it's that connection that's needed. It's not just being in close proximity. It's how can you get to know their name, and they know your name and know your children, and know that you're a safe person and a support, and that you acknowledge them when you see them. That's what is an important element of community connectedness. And to the land, the connectedness with the land is, this foster care alumni shared how much that was a support and how important that was for his journey while he was in foster care. There was an elder that would take him and his brother out to subsistence hunt, and that allowed him to feel connected and sort of stop the tape, the tape that sometimes runs in our mind that's questioning, why am I here? What is this? I don't want to be suffering, those sorts of things that sometimes our mind and survival response really focuses on. But nature is soothing. This was a foster parent who shared, the biggest help for them were the ICWA workers. So recognizing our roles, whether you're working in, juvenile probation, child welfare, education, healthcare, all of that, all of our roles are important to our community and to the families and children. And we want to be that biggest help for others who are going through hard times and challenges and crises. So how can we show up and be that for others? And this element, the third lesson, to really look at facilitating relational healing, coming back to our relational identity, coming back to knowing who we are and where we come from. This was coming up in several of the interviews as well. So culture is a big piece of that. Our names, our ways of naming children is a big piece of that. It connects us to others. It bridges gaps between families sometimes, or community members. But this quote I really love and want to share from another alumni who said, "The importance for me is to know where I came from and to know who I am and just being me. Because in this world, without my culture and without my language and without the stuff I know, I feel lost. Who am I? Was I supposed to be someone different? Then I should learn those things. And it's just really important to me to know that stuff so I can pass it down to my children, because it's who we are. And it's really important to have with us." So we want to have systems that maintain that for everyone involved, that there's no more disconnect, no more not knowing who you are. There's relational continuity, there's relational healing that is at the foundation of helping families through whatever it is that they may be going through. And this is the updated framework as a result of all of that knowledge that was shared, the stories, the sacred conversations we had. And what the letters in the red represent that acknowledgement of the traumas and challenges that were brought up in the stories. So people shared elements of witnessing or experiencing violence, or feeling disconnected from their language, or feeling like, they lived in a rural community and had to move to an urban one, and there's a big divide there. All of these aspects were coming up in the various stories. These words in red can become mechanisms of disconnect. And so we want to do our best to keep that out from becoming a mechanism of relational disconnect. It's not to say that things don't happen in life, traumas don't occur, challenges don't, they happen, but we don't want that to be outweighed by the connectedness mechanisms, the relational connectedness ways that we have healthy, strong, well relationships. So these were all things that people spoke about on what helped them maintain relationships in different ways, or build new relationships with community, with the knowledge of who their ancestors were, with family, with the earth. And so one thing I changed the language around this all-encompassing piece, that, culture was often spoken in conjunction with spirit. So I changed the terminology there a little bit, that cultural and spiritual connectedness is what helps make all of this possible. And what that does, this is where I got more in depth about this inner ecology, and I'll share that on the next slide, but Oscar Coagli had that term in some of his written materials. This inner ecology, that when we have healthy relationships on the external world, in the external world, it helps children have a healthy belief system, to know that they have gifts, that they belong, that their self-worth, that they're safe, that they're filled with knowledge that they can use in a good way, that there's ancestral strength that they've inherited. There's aspects of forgiveness. And again, it's not to say like feelings of grief and sadness and those things come up, but we want it to be outweighed, again, as much as possible, with the joy and with the love and with the light. And for children to know that they can have both the joy, the love, and the light, and the sadness and the grief and some of that pain, and carry both. And it's not either or, that they can move forward in life in that way, and then show up in their relationships with others from that place, that I feel will help those relationships be a reciprocal, healthy dynamic. So going more in depth, I'm still working on some papers around this aspect of, our inner ecology, our internal connectedness, our relational identity, and the ways that, different aspects of connectedness shape this. And I'm still working on it. But I wanted to share briefly some of those mechanisms that I'm thinking about are likely helpful in that process of helping a child with developing a healthy inner ecology. These are some of those mechanisms. So back to an important point that was made by an alumni that shared, it really is a case-by-case basis in terms of here's a framework, but again, how it specifically applies to a person, an agency, an office, a community, a region is going to look different. And again, it will be filled in with their diverse knowledge and experience and needs. So just keep that in mind as you think about connectedness, this connectedness framework. And there's so many considerations to come from this research. One of the questions that I really ask is like, who do I serve, and what systems am I serving? As a social worker, you can sometimes feel like stuck in between, feeling like I'm serving a system that is not serving the people. And I want that disconnect to shift so that I feel the system is serving the people and the people are benefiting from it. So there's so many concepts that I feel the connectedness framework could shift and inform in terms of safety. It is not safe for a child to be removed from family, community, from their siblings, from their connection with the earth, from themselves. So that has to change. We have to ensure that systems are not perpetuating trauma or inflicting trauma in that way. This concept of child maltreatment, thinking of it as a relational wound, really going deep on the social history, connecting those dots. I know there's genograms and all of those sorts of things that I was trained to do when I went into child welfare a long time ago, but to not skip that step. I think sometimes we, due to how busy people get, we miss that sometimes. To understand that trauma is likely at the root of almost all of the different ways that parents may be maltreating their children. And if it's not trauma, then there's systemic oppressions. Poverty is another common denominator. The ways that we engage families, the policies, the funding, it all has to shift to this relational way of being, to focus more on the prevention and promotion of well-being rather than putting billions into foster care and adoption. We need billions in prevention or both, but it shouldn't be this imbalance in the funding mechanisms. We need power, authority, responsibility given back to community. Right now, I feel like systems are out of balance in terms of not listening enough to lived experience, not listening enough to community need, not responding to community need. I know there are pockets of beautiful projects and things happening in other states and communities that are doing that, and how beautiful that shift is when that happens. And then we really have to talk about this aspect of moral distress. When I was a worker and a supervisor, and I often question whether what I was doing in that role was doing more harm or doing any good. And that sort of conflict of like, I went in it with the best intentions and I feel like it's not aligned with that value of do no harm or whatever your values may be. That is a signal to me that something within the system has to change. And we need to listen to that. We need to shift and change systems so that we can feel good about the work that we do. And it's about coming back to balance. I'm like, maybe we need relational identity connectedness plans instead of calling it a case plan. I don't know, but our role in our life, in our presence is precious. And we all deserve to feel whole. We all deserve to feel well. We all deserve healthy relationships. I feel like my daughter, when she went to my dissertation defense, she asked this question and she was like, Mom, aren't all grown-ups children too because they have parents? So I feel like, oh, I was like mind blown. I just love children and how much they can teach us. This model, this framework applies to everyone. I know I'm calling it Indigenous connectedness, but to me, it's really about being a human being, which is oftentimes our Indigenous terms for our group of people. Inupiaq translates to the real human being. I want everyone to feel that they're a real human being, a relational human being. So with that, when we do that healing work, when we reconnect with that and we heal our hearts and we let go of the false beliefs and we stop the relational wounding, when we listen and we share truth and we come back in right relationship, all of these challenges and traumas, the red lettering, the oppressions, the racism, all of that, I feel will dissolve. It will shift. We will not let that continue to happen. And it takes a collective, I feel, to be, dedicated to promoting this aspect within our work. So I need all of you to do your part. I'm going to do my part, but it's this sense of a shared responsibility. It's on all of us. So with that, when we make those shifts, when we help children know who they are, where they come from, when we know who we are, where we come from at the core, beyond all the social constructs and false identities, I guess, or disconnected identities, or feeling like who we are is trauma, that's not who we are, and we take our power back, that this will help all of those relationships. It'll help the earth heal. It will help our children and future generations. It will help our ancestors. That's one of my favorite quotes from grandmother, Dr. Rita Blumenstein. We are that important. When we do our own healing work, we're helping the healing work of everyone. So these are some ideas on ways we can end system-based relational wounding. I feel that like our role is to be a seed for positive change, to keep doing our good work, to trust that this good work is for a reason, that everyone you come across is for a reason. And that as we plant these seeds for positive change, that they will grow, it will shift. I already feel like it's here. The change we want is here. And it's just our job to live it. And I end with this painting my daughter made for me this year. And it's exactly in alignment with what my intention was on my 40th birthday. I said a prayer to heal. I asked to heal my heart. And then I came back home and she gave me this painting, and it was just that sort of synchronistic confirmation that it's going to happen, and it has. And this is a pretty huge shift for me. I feel like all of this research, the people that I came across, everything has helped me on this journey. And to remember that, it's all about love. It's all about the light we have inside. When we come from that place, when we connect with who we truly are, the opportunities are limitless, and we become co-creators and not just passive participants in life. We become a co-creator, and I'm ready to co-create with you a better world, a better child welfare system. And I'm just so grateful for all of the work that you do, that everyone does, in order to make this life and world a better place for our sacred children. So thank you. And I'd love to take questions and answers now.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ullrich, for a really powerful presentation. I wrote down so many things that you said that I just want to go back to and think about. And I was particularly struck by this idea of kind of starting from this place of like well-being and assets, and then the trauma just kind of continuing to emerge as sort of an important piece. And how do we hold those both together, and the way that you sort of reshaped the framework to include it while also acknowledging the challenge of it. So really, really appreciate you being here. I see we're getting a lot of folks saying, you know, this is so impactful, so inspiring. I encourage folks to put their questions in the Q&A if you do have questions. I'll start out with, I kind of want to bring you back to, you talked about when you worked in child welfare and this feeling of sort of being part of a system that feels broken, or that feels like it's not accomplished, not aligned perhaps with, you know, the vision that you have for child well-being. And I wonder sort of what guidance you would give to people who may identify with that, or may feel like, am I doing more? Am I helping or hurting? And how do I sort of stay in this work in a way that feels aligned with the future that we want to build?
Yeah, thank you for sharing that question. And I don't have a full answer to that in terms of that challenge. I know part of what motivated me to stay with it for as long as I did, I worked with an OCS 8.5 years, was I sort of felt a need to do my best to help children who are within this system, who are caught in this, be as connected as they can be with their family and with teachings of their culture, and with the knowledge and those sorts of elements. Like I wanted to, in some ways, protect them from the system, to be blunt and honest. And I did get to a point where I think I was experiencing some burnout. My body was telling me like, it's too much. It's not going well. You're not taking care of yourself in the way that you need. So it's important to listen to that inner voice, to listen to your body, to take good care of yourself, to do the best you can. I know I did make a difference with many families that I interfaced with. I know that I helped youth. I know that the work was needed and important. I know that there did need to be an intervention in order to ensure that the children no longer were harmed. I just feel that if we shift the system to be more community driven and based, and it being a shared responsibility again, and not an us and them mentality or tribe and state mentality, that we're all coming together to heal and to help, genuinely help a family, and to get at the root, which is often trauma, that's where I think will help people who are working within the system feel better about the work that they're doing. And I did experience pieces of that. But there were times when I was going, I don't know. And that, to me, again, I feel is an indicator we need to make a shift. So.
Absolutely. Thank you. I want to share a few questions from participants. Holly shares that she's an adoptive mom of 3 young American Indian girls. They were not ICWA, and I've heard various tribes named. Where can I start opening them to their community identity?
Yeah, if you know the tribe's names, that's where I would go to first, and start calling up that tribe and just tell them I've adopted these girls. I'm wondering if there's any way that I can help them feel connected with their tribe. And I'm sure that you'll find the right person that will provide that connection and some links and give you some information and resources, and to also be open to perhaps there are extended family members that are healthy that could also give that guidance. So the tribe may be able to give you some information about who their family is if you have some of that background that you can share with the tribe. So look for ways to build that relational continuity. And I love that you're interested in doing that. That to me is part of how we help that healing, relational healing, take place.
Thank you for that response. The next question comes from Diane. She says, I love this very complete and inclusive way of looking at wellness and connectedness. And she's thinking about a learning framework that was developed in the North Slope Borough School District by Indigenous educators and community members, but it was not fully embraced by non-Indigenous leadership. And have you thought about your framework and how it can inform environments like K-12 and higher ed or other agencies?
Yeah, I've been getting asked more and more to come and speak to different systems and contexts. And I feel like this framework can apply to multiple systems, including the education system. And for the resistance, I know that there are people who may hear this and be like, walls up, I don't know. But that's where I feel like when I share with you that this is about our common humanity, this is something that will help everybody. I've seen some of those walls come down, and I've seen the barriers sort of dissipate, and there's more of a willingness to listen and to engage. And if there is not a willingness, then it's about leadership. I feel stepping up, getting on board, and then being kind of that lead and guide to say, we're going to implement, help implement this, and do your best to bring people along and get their insights on what the application of this could look like. Because when you're inclusive like that and you involve everybody, that there's much more, you get better ideas too. Like there's much more engagement and probably better outcomes. But again, it's like, it's also got to come from the community taking their power back and saying, no, this is what we are going to do here. Take it or leave it, kind of. Like I'm just in a blunt mood today. It must be the full moon. But there's aspects of that I feel the community and families can really be influential as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to share, I'm not sure we're going to get through all the questions, but perhaps people can reach out to you after the webinar if they wanted to follow up on some, if we don't get to all of them. But this is more of a policy question. Anna Jean asks about the Family First Prevention Services Act. It's intended to avoid removal. Do you think it will help change the disproportionality? And are there recommended ways to include tribal best practices as part of a prevention plan?
Yes, thank you for that question. I love the concept of the Family First Prevention Services Act, and it's somewhat problematic because of how difficult it is to access those funds, and how one of the criteria is that there's evidence-based practices that are utilized by the community. And it's only problematic because I feel like research is not engaged in communities that are doing the cultural, beautiful cultural practices work that is effective, and sharing that with the world. And there's more work to be done in that regard. So again, I feel like there's potential there. And there's another look that needs to be made at this policy in the, you know, the doorway to accessing funds and utilizing cultural programs and interventions really needs to be opened up more than what it is now. So.
Great, thank you. Well, I see we're at the hour. I just want to thank you again so much for joining today and sharing this important work with our community. And if your questions were not addressed and you can reach out to Dr. Ullrich after the session, please do. We will be sharing the slides and the recording with everyone who registered today. So you'll have access to those to refer back to. And I just want to, again, thank you, Dr. Ullrich, and thank everyone who joined us today for this session. And hope everyone stays well.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Take care.